In this section, Richard Dawkins will be talking about Harun Yahya's, I can't read, Atlas of Creation. Without much ado, we'll go straight to Richard Dawkins.
Thank you very much. I'm truly delighted to be here, and I want to salute those ex-Muslims who are prepared to stand up and say that that's what they are, and may you be the nucleus of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions more who do the same thing. I am a great admirer of Al Jazeera's English language service, and I was therefore very shocked when I saw a couple of days ago the Arabic version of Al Jazeera with subtitles in which they interviewed this man, Harun Yahya, whose real name is Adnan Okhtar. He's an extremely naive creationist. And in exactly the opposite spirit to Al Jazeera's English language service, the Arabic language service swallowed it hook, line and sinker. And I got the impression that we are divided, that there's I would have got the impression from this Al Jazeera broadcast that the whole of the Islamic world is completely and utterly taken in by the naive pseudoscience which is creationism. Adnan Okhtar, alias Harun Yahya, stands for that. He's also a very unpleasant man. Nobody could say that he doesn't have balls. And he shows this in various ways. When my book, The God Delusion, first came out, he succeeded temporarily in getting the publisher and translator arrested for blasphemy. In the last few weeks, he has succeeded in persuading a Turkish court to ban my website, richarddawkins.net. And he's said to have sued me for 8,000 Turkish lira. That's 3,300 British pounds. His lawyers have listed phrases and sentences that I wrote on my website, which they claim assault his personal rights. Weirdly, I learned about this lawsuit, all second-hand from newspapers. I've received not the slightest communication from his lawyers, from him, or from any Turkish court, but I'm advised by friends in Turkey that I ought to be hiring a lawyer, in spite of the fact that nobody's even approached me with this suit. That seems to be the way they do it. Anyway, the first thing we did when we heard about this was to get my entire article, the one that offended him, translated into Turkish, and we put it up on the website because, needless to say, the attempt to ban it in Turkey is pretty futile. It's very hard to ban a website, and there are large areas of Turkey where it can be seen, and it's now been picked up by other Turkish websites. For example, this one, that's again another Turkish translation of the article which has offended Harun Yahya. He is widely known for writing a large number of books, most notably Atlas of Creation, which has been distributed free to enormous numbers of science teachers around the world. And when I say free, the sheer scale of that operation is mind-boggling. This book is a large format book. It's got 764 pages. Every one of those pages is high gloss paper with gorgeously reproduced photographs of animals on every page. I took the book yesterday round to Oxford University Press, and I had 3 people there try to cost out what it would cost to produce this book. And they thought that the cost of producing these did somebody say 10,000 copies to me today being distributed free? That would be about £500,000. So this is a free gift from somebody. Where the money comes from, nobody seems to know. I'll come to that in a moment. To give you an idea of the size of the book, the dog is intended to give scale. I would like to think it also gives offence. As for where the money comes from, I think it would make a nice assignment for an investigative journalist to try to work that out. Does it come from Adnan Oktar himself? Well, he's certainly not a poor man, as you saw from that James Bond villain picture that I had up at first. And just recently, he has, this is from The Independent, he has offered a prize to anybody who can produce an intermediate fossil, an evolutionary intermediate fossil. The size of the prize is 10 trillion Turkish lira, which is equivalent to 4.4 trillion British pounds. That is 36 times the gross national product of Turkey. It's more than the gross national product of Germany, France, Britain, Italy and China combined. 13 times the wealth of Bill Gates. So perhaps we should all put in for it, but I'm going to tell you at the end that his idea of what would constitute an intermediate fossil is a fairly odd one. Now, onto the book. Onto the book itself. Unlike most Christian fundamentalists who think the world was created in 6 days, 6,000 years ago, Adnan Oktar is an old Earth creationist. He understands what fossils are, and he agrees that they're old. His one point, which is bludgeoned home on every single page of this enormous book, is that ancient animals haven't changed. So that's his strategy, quite different from the Christian fundamentalists. His strategy is on every page he has a fossil, and then next door to it he has a modern animal, and he says, look, they're exactly the same as each other. I'm going to show you a few examples to show the depth of his zoological erudition. The first one on the left is a crinoid. A crinoid is a so-called sea lily. It's a member of the phylum Echinodermata. It is a relative of a sea urchin. It's a kind of sea urchin on a stalk. That's a fossil. On the right is what he says is exactly the same. What that is a sabellid worm. It's an annelid worm. It's related to earthworms. It's nothing whatever to do with echinoderms. Just to give you an idea of that, that's a very, very crude taxonomy of the animal kingdom according to modern zoology. You see that the animal kingdom is divided up into two main branches. On the left we have the so-called protostomes. This is all based on embryological criteria. On the right we have the deuterostomes, and this is a major, major division of the animal kingdom. These are two sub-kingdoms. An animal in the protostomes and an animal in the deuterostomes could not be more different from each other while still remaining members of the animal kingdom. And the sabellid worm, you see up at the top left, is an annelid. It's a protostome, and the crinoid is an echinoderm. It's a deuterostome. These things could not be more different if they tried, unless they became a plant or something. Here's another example. The fossil there is an eel, and he says it's 95 million years old. I've no reason to doubt that. The modern animal, which hasn't changed at all since the fossil eel, that's not an eel at all. It's a snake. It's a sea snake, a poisonous sea snake. You've probably seen them if you've dived in tropical waters. It's a poisonous sea snake belonging to the genus Laticorda. Once again, you couldn't be more different if you tried, so long as you stay a vertebrate. This is the champion one of all. There's a caddisfly in amber, which is 25 million years old. And look, it hasn't changed at all to the modern one. The modern one, the modern caddisfly, is a tide fishing fly. and it still got its hook. Now, you might put that down to not just ignorance, but sort of carelessness. Maybe he didn't look very carefully, but I tracked this down to the website where he stole it, which is a website of a champion fishing fly tire. There it is. And you'll notice that the background, you see that sort of grey bit in the background? He's cut it out. He must have worked for a long time in Photoshop on this picture. And he still didn't spot that hook. Or else maybe he thinks that caddisflies really do have hooks. Well, as I was browsing this Fishing Fly Tires website, I came across something else which I thought looked familiar. That's a spider made by the fly tire. It's an artificial spider, very beautifully tied, obviously, and I'm sure it's very tempting to the fish for whom it was designed when on the end of a hook. But I thought it looked familiar, and I went back to Harun Yahya's book, and sure enough, there it is. Look, it hasn't changed at all from the one in amber up at the top. Well, you can't really see very much of the one in amber. It doesn't, even if that was a real modern spider, it wouldn't really make the case very convincingly. Yeah, that's a brittle star, and the modern one is a starfish. And again, you can't get more different as long as you stay in echinoderm. Now back to the fossil, the prize for the fossil intermediate. I wanted to make the point that he's got a very, very weird idea of what an intermediate would look like. This idea of there aren't any intermediate fossils is a favorite one of all creationists, not just Muslim ones, but Christian ones as well. Their constant refrain is, produce your intermediates. There are no intermediates. The fossil record is completely devoid of evolutionary intermediates. This has always puzzled me, because just about every fossil you find is going to be an intermediate between something and something else. And yet they seem to think this is a highly trenchant point that they're making. And it was Harun Yahya who finally dropped the scales from my eyes. The reason why these people think there are no intermediates, they've got a very, very weird idea of what an intermediate would look like. Sorry, that's an old slide. There you see a picture that he's put together with a baby crocodile on the left and some sort of ground squirrel on the right. And what he's saying is, there are no intermediates between crocodiles and squirrels. Well, you know, why would you expect an intermediate? There exists no transitional form. Darwinists claim, I'm quoting now, that by undergoing minor changes, living beings evolved from one species to another over millions of years. According to this claim, which is refuted by scientific findings, fish transformed into amphibians and reptiles transformed into birds. This so-called transformation process, asserted to last for millions of years, should have left countless evidence in the fossil record. In other words, during their intense researches for the last 100 years, researchers should have uncovered many grotesque living beings, such as half fish, half lizard, half spider, half fly, or half lizard, half bird. However, although almost every stratum on Earth has been dug, not even a single fossil has been found that Darwinists can use as evidence for their so-called transition. On the other hand, there are innumerable fossils showing that spiders were always spiders, flies were always flies, fish were always fish, crocodiles were always crocodiles, rabbits were always rabbits, and birds were always birds. Hundreds of millions of fossils clearly show that living beings have not undergone evolution, but were created. Hundreds of millions of fossils prove that living beings did not evolve, but were created. And that picture sums up what he thinks. There's a starfish, there is a fish, and some kind of a photoshopped intermediate. I finally realize what these people think an intermediate fossil is. They think you take a modern animal, and you take another modern animal, and you get some kind of a halfway between. It may be that the back end is one animal and the front end's another, like that. Or you kind of morph from one to the other. They haven't the faintest idea what it is that they are criticizing. And I'm grateful to Mr. Ouكتار for finally opening my eyes to this weird phenomenon. Now, as I said, he has allegedly sued me, and I'm going to, I suppose, do something about it. Or it would be nice if I got some sort of official word. What I'm wondering is whether there are any people of Turkish origin here who might be able to throw some light on this odd phenomenon that I learned from the newspapers that I've been sued and not from any official source, and this further any further advice that you can give. Is there anybody here of Turkish origin? No. Okay. Never mind. Okay. Well, I'm ready to take questions. Thank you very much. Hi. No, I think Turkey is constitutionally a highly secular country, so it certainly would not be a Sharia court.
Richard, Harun Yahya makes a big fuss on his website and in his press about how he's challenged you to a debate or invited you to a debate and that you've declined. Is that the case, and would you ever consider, or under what conditions would you consider debating him?
I always decline debates with creationists. I've done this ever since asking advice from Stephen Jay Gould, who did the same thing. If you agree to have a debate with them, what you're doing is giving them legitimacy. You're saying there is a serious scientific matter to discuss. Here we are sitting on a platform. It gets even worse when you have the elaborate legalistic rules of debate. You have 20 minutes for the proposition, 20 minutes for the opposition, 5 minutes to reply, 5 minutes to reply. It all creates the illusion that there is some real issue to debate. I hope that I've shown you from these just half dozen slides that the debate would be simply ridiculous. I mean, this man doesn't know anything about zoology, he doesn't know anything about biology, he knows nothing about the evolution that he is attempting to refute. He's a complete and utter ignoramus.
Thank you. I think the underlying theme of your talk is that science today is being challenged. Rationality is being challenged by a religion, by superstition, by misguided dogmatism. And also in these days of dwindling funds and dwindling student numbers in engineering and science, we're also seeing that things like this are being funded in oil barrel loads of money. What's the answer? How do we turn this back?
I wish that the answer was as simple as just simply lay out the facts and show people how obvious they are and how easy to understand they are. That's the policy that I have adopted throughout my entire career, through 9-10 books. It works for some people, but I'm afraid it's becoming increasingly clear that it does not work for people whose childhood indoctrination, imprinting one might almost call it, is sufficiently strong. The most dramatic illustration of this I know is a man called Kurt Wise, who's an American geologist who did a degree at the University of Chicago. He then did a doctorate at Harvard in geology under Steve Gould, no less, and he then became aware that the geology he was learning was, he became increasingly aware that it was incompatible with the religion of his childhood, which was fundamentalist Christianity. And he dramatically describes how he got a pair of scissors and a Bible, and he went right through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, cutting out every verse that would have to go if he took science seriously. And it says at the end that having gone through this exercise, there was so little left of Scripture that it just fell apart. There was nothing left. And he said, that night, in great sorrow, I tossed into the flames, and you hope he's going to toss the Bible into the flames, but no, I tossed into the flames all my hopes and aspirations to be a scientist and a science teacher. He gave up science. And then he goes on to a sort of final peroration where he says in this article, if all the evidence in the universe demonstrated an old Earth, if all the evidence in the universe showed that the Earth is old, I would still be a young Earth creationist, because that is what Holy Scripture tells me. Now, I find myself powerless against that. I find myself despairing against somebody who can actually, after a Chicago, Harvard education in science of the best possible kind in the world, can stand up and say, if all the evidence goes one way and Scripture goes the other, I'm going to go with Scripture. What chance have we got when the indoctrination, the imprinting of childhood, leaves a mind so wrecked as that?
Richard, that was absolutely wonderful.